Okay, in this video, I would like to show everyone how Ed, in the end, is really doing this whole thing with the dielectricity and this DC discharge phenomenon. Okay, so let's get started and continue where we left off before. I had showed you that Ed has all these bottles with all these wires wrapped around it, and what it is, it's his way of making a battery or a storage capacitor for the energy. Okay, so while Ed's flywheel is spinning, he's probably got some kind of deal on the top of this flywheel that acts as an antenna or waveguide. So he's probably got some kind of deal up here, like maybe a pyramidal structure, people are thinking, or something. And then he's got this set up, probably, like this. Here you see Ed's tripod. Okay, on top of the tripod is the black box. Okay, this is the points and condenser from the Model T. This is Ed's other antenna. Okay, just like a pyramid. Just like the antenna here. Because it's dealing with the water molecule and the hydrogen. So this is how this whole thing's working. It's working just like Tesla's system from ground to ionosphere. You're dealing with this connection right there this whole time. So what I showed you before in the previous video is Ed Leedskellen's PMH, or his resistance at the end of the electrical connection. So it's his resistive load. Well, he could have also had this deal too. He could have had this whole thing in a different conjunction, of different ways. Okay, so he might have had this set up too, to where he's just got a loop. I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. Here's some of Ed's wire. And this is what I went to Coral Castle mainly for. This is the thing I think everybody missed. I went to Coral Castle strictly to look at the wire. I know it sounds crazy, but you'll see what I'm talking about. I'm going to show you what the PMH does. And I'm going to show you a DC dielectric blast. This is coming from my system for my solar panels. So this is my charging system. This is a 12 volt DC battery, just like in your car. And just like what would be in the Model T, a 12 volt DC system. It's not, the Model T is going to have less than 12 volts. They weren't up to that high voltage back then. So it's going to be the same deal, 12 volt, negative ground, just like in your car. So this is out of a Caterpillar battery, Caterpillar front end loader. It's a super heavy duty battery. This is my inverter. This is my battery charger. My charge controller for my solar panels are right here. And we're basically inside of my small recording studio, so which is underneath the stairwell in my tiny house here. So here's the PMH, okay, and what this thing is doing, it can become a bunch of different things. What I'm going to show you is how the bar here is going to connect like an electromagnet. When I tap off of the battery, it's going to do this and basically weld itself to this U shape, and it's not gonna be like a regular electromagnet, because a regular electromagnet, when you let off the power, it's gonna drop. You're not gonna have anything, just like the electromagnets that pick up cars at scrapyards. This is going to contain that whole deal in the coil, and then it's going to be circulating. Okay, so I'm going to set this up. I hope you guys can see this. I'm going to try and go brighter here. Don't try this at home, unless you're a MacGyver like me. We're going to be doing a DC blaster, so I hope this thing catches it. I'll show you what I mean. This is why I went to Coral Castle to check out these wires to see if they were all fried out like mine on here. Here you go. Okay. You got it. She's charged. Now your PMH is charged. Now, this whole thing is running in the circuit. Okay, so Ed called his machine a light machine. Now Ed's a joker because he's always flipping things. It is a light machine because it does produce light. So when you pull this bar off here, you'll get a discharge and it will cause a light bulb to flash. Ed is also a joker because his light machine actually does make stuff lighter in a weight sense. So let's continue on. So that's what's being blasted from his capacitor bank. And like I said, you can do the same thing with this. So what we need to look at real quick are these words. Okay. And this book tells you exactly how to do this whole thing. Demagnetize, to remove magnetism from an object. Diamagnetic, a material that will not conduct magnetic lines of flux. Diamagnetic materials have a permeability rating less than that of air, 1, or the K dielectric value. Okay, dielectric, an electrical insulator. Dielectric breakdown, the point at which the insulating material separating the two electric charges permits current to flow between the two electric charges. Dielectric breakdown is often caused by excessive voltage or excessive heat or both. Okay, so you just seen some excessive voltage and some excessive heat in my demonstration. Dielectric constant, a method of determining the insulation properties of a dielectric using air as a reference. Remember, air, K dielectric value of 1.006. So, dielectric stress, the molecular stress placed on a dielectric material proportional to the level of applied voltage. Okay, there's one more that I want to look at. Okay, direct current, DC, current that does not reverse its direction of flow. So you just seen it all go one way out of that battery because the battery is DC. Okay, so let's look at this real quick. An interferometer splits light and puts it back together. In DC sound, this is something that John Bandini come up with. John Bandini disassembles the sound and puts it back together. Okay, this whole deal is like heterodyning. Heterodyning is mixing sound frequencies and interference patterns. Okay, so they say the Coral Castle stones are singing at 18 kilohertz or maybe 16. Okay, what does that mean? It means that they're running at that frequency. Okay, so we'll get into this. But this whole thing is working like this. This guy is doing this deal right now. And it's the same thing that the Biefeld-Brown effect is, where you have the Earth in the ionosphere, or you have a capacitor plate that's a positive and a capacitor plate that's a negative. You got a ground and then you got the ionosphere. Well, when you zap this thing with enough voltage, the charge always makes the object go to positive. Okay, and so this is what they were doing with the Biefeld-Brown effect with these capacitors, where they're taking a dielectric and then a non-conductive, then a dielectric, or a conductive, non-conductive, organic, non-organic. It's the same thing with capacitor plates. Okay, so what this guy, Larry Davenport, has done, he's on this Richard Hoagland show, and he's talking about, he's building these capacitors, and he's using ceramic fiber, which insulation on it is 32,000 degrees. It has a melting point of 32,000 degrees. Okay, so it's super high dielectric. He's giving it 1 to 2 seconds at 50,000 volts from a high voltage power source. Okay, so when he's zapping this thing, it's moving all over because he's got it hanging like on a string or something. So he's playing around with these things and just blasting them. Okay, so this is just to give you a sense on what Ed is doing. Okay, so let's continue on. Let's go on to what Eric Dollard says about this thing. Okay, get out of the light a little bit here. Okay, just remember this shape here and how this whole deal is set up. Okay, Dollard. Origin of energy synthesis. Okay, Tesla says the sun is charged with 2 billion volts of electricity. When the planets align, this causes solar flares, causes mass changes in radio propagation because of these lines of electricity in alignment. That's what I'm talking about with the whole right angle deal with the Earth and the sun and the radio waves. Okay, so the planets act each as a capacitor when aligned electric lines of force. Okay, two objects with electrostatic field between them, the more you try to separate them, the more they want to pull together. Once you try to separate them, the higher the voltage has to be raised to keep the quantity of energy constant. The voltage will continue to increase until nothing can withstand the stress and it blasts. You just seen me blast out the DC out of that battery. This is the condition happening in space. Knowledge of inductance and magnetism is greater than the knowledge of dielectric and capacitance. Physicists say there is no dielectric, there is no capacitance. There is electrons, action at a distance with no lines of force between them, saying that there is no electricity. Inductance represents stored energy in space as in a magnetic field. Lines of force around a magnet represent stored energy. Current flow is like the magnetism scraping on the wire. The larger the space between this current and its images of reflection, the opposite wire, the more energy can be stored in the field. It's like storing magnetism in a bottle. Remember, the toroidal is the shape of your magnetism. Dollard. The process of pushing these lines or loops outward, causing them to stretch, represents storing energy in a rubber band. The current strength will hold the loop of force at a given distance from the conductor, passing current with no energy movement. If the flow of the current increases, the energy absorbed by the field as the loop pushes outward at its corresponding velocity. Because the energy is in motion, an electromotive force must now accompany the current flow to represent power. The magnitude of this electromotive force exactly corresponds to the velocity of the field. A change in the magnetic field with representation to time is the voltage or the electromotive force. As long as there is change in the magnetic field, there must be an electromotive force. Like in a car, if at a constant speed, you won't feel any motion until there's a change in velocity or speed occurs. By hitting the brakes, you are pushed forward. By hitting the gas, you are pulled backwards. Just like the cosmic oscillations, okay? The rate of change in velocity, the electromotive force reacts to any change in the system just like an inertia. An EMF must accompany the current flow in order to represent power. If the current stops changing in magnitude, becoming constant, there is no EMF, no power being absorbed. If the current is decreased, it represents a negative velocity in the field as the loops contract. If you reverse in the current equals negative velocity, okay? Because the EMF corresponds exactly to the velocity it reverses, okay, the polarity, because the EMF corresponds exactly to the velocity it reverses polarity and reverses power. So now it moves out of the field and into the current. Since no power is required to maintain the field, only current, the static or stationary field represents stored energy. Here we go. By trapping or releasing energy instantly is where the phenomenon occurs. The limits of zero infinity is where time equals zero. Time is instantaneous. There's no time to grab onto. So when switched off, the inductance drains its energy into the resistance that converts it to a form of heat. You just see me release the heat from that spark. Perfect conductor is zero, no resistance. A coil cooled to absolute zero. Okay, if we remove the current supply by shorting the terminals of the inductor, we've isolated it without interrupting any current. Since the collapse of the field produces EMF, this EMF will tend to manifest. A short circuit will not let EMF to develop across it, since it has no zero reference by definition. The energy will remain in the field, just like in the PMH. Because no EMF can combine with the current to form any power, any attempt to collapse the field, it will be trapped. The door will be closed by the wire or the loop, tying the two ends of the coil together, forming a complete loop, so the magnetism will be trapped inside. Okay? Objects cooled to absolute zero will float on the lines of magnetism. Okay? Because the magnetism can't get to the counter space of the interdimensional material of the metal, because it's an absolute zero and there's no E flow. Tend not to say the E word on this channel. So the conductor will float on the magnetism because there is no change in the energy balance. It's like a magnetic shock absorber spring. Any attempt to increase the current pushes back out. This is a form of stored energy. Okay, so here we go. This is what Dollard is saying that it's doing with this whole deal. Just from his own words and from me interpreting them. Okay, interesting and dangerous phenomenon occur, especially in DC when the current path is interrupted or if the circuit's broke. The resistance, best represented by its inverse, the conductance. The conductance is then zero because the current vanishes instantly. The field collapses at a velocity of light. As the EMF is directly related to the velocity of flux, it tends towards infinity. This is the power that we're dealing with here. Nobody realizes this. Like I said, this is the Hutchinson effect, and this is the Philadelphia experiment. This is the Tesla monopolar deal that he was working on at Colorado Springs, 1899. Okay? Very powerful effects are produced because the field is attempting to maintain current by producing whatever electromotive force that is required. This is the whole deal. So that's how Ed's doing it. That's exactly how Ed's doing it, and that's what I went to Coral Castle for, was to look at these wires and these other big wires that he's had outside by the gate. So I hope you like this, and we're just going to keep going a little bit deeper on this and explaining a few more things. But this is how Ed's doing it, and I appreciate everybody for watching these videos, and I'm just glad I was able to put all this stuff together so that everybody can figure this stuff out just like I figured it out. So thanks for watching.